I used to believe I was the luckiest woman alive, until I realized I was living in a beautifully decorated prison. My name is Emily. I'm 39 years old, and for the longest time, I truly believed I had everything I ever wanted. Daniel was charming from the start, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and brought you flowers on a random Tuesday. He had this calm, confident energy that made people trust him immediately. And I wasn't any different. I fell for him hard, and I fell fast. Within 6 months, we were engaged. By the end of the year, we were married. Everyone said we were perfect together. A love story. A dream. Back then, I would have agreed. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, with white shutters and a wraparound porch that made me feel like I was living in a magazine. Daniel insisted I didn't need to work anymore, that he made enough for both of us and wanted me to relax and enjoy life. At first it felt like a luxury. I had spent years grinding away in marketing jobs that drained me, so when he said I could focus on hobbies or maybe go back to school, it felt like he was being generous, supportive, loving. That's how I interpreted everything he did. Love. He didn't like my best friend, Rachel. He just thought she was a bad influence. He preferred we didn't go to parties. He only wanted to spend quality time with me. He wanted to know where I was, who I talked to, what I bought. It was because he cared, and I believed him. I did. Every day, I woke up to breakfast already made, coffee in my favorite mug, a kiss on my forehead. Daniel was attentive, thoughtful. My friends would say, "You're so lucky, Em." Most guys would kill to be half as sweet as him, and I would smile, agreeing, because in that carefully constructed version of our life, I was lucky. I didn't see the isolation as it crept in. I didn't see how my world got smaller each day, how my voice grew quieter, how I stopped making decisions for myself. I didn't feel the walls closing in, because they were painted with love, with good intentions, with whispered reassurances that he was only trying to protect me. There were no raised voices, no bruises, nothing you could point to and say, "This is wrong." It was subtler than that. A look that made me question myself, a sigh that made me feel guilty, a smile that vanished the moment I disagreed with him. But back then, I thought I had it all. And if you had asked me whether Daniel was the love of my life, I would have said yes, without hesitation. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Daniel had started coming home later than usual. He said work was overwhelming, too many deadlines, a new manager breathing down his neck, the usual corporate nonsense. I understood. I remembered those stressful days from when I used to work, so I didn't question it. I greeted him with a warm smile, a hot dinner, and a glass of wine. I told myself this was what a supportive wife does, but over time, the warmth between us began to cool. He stopped asking me about my day. He'd scroll through his phone during dinner or leave the TV on as background noise while I tried to talk about the book I was reading or the art class I was thinking of taking. Sometimes he would nod, say, "That's nice," and go right back to whatever was capturing his attention. I missed his eyes on me. I missed his interest. Still, I blamed myself. Maybe I had become boring. Maybe staying home had dulled me. I started looking at myself in the mirror more critically. My hair wasn't as perfectly styled as it used to be. My clothes had become more practical than pretty. I started dressing up again, just for him. I wore lipstick around the house and bought a new perfume I knew he used to love. He didn't notice. One night I made his favorite meal, rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, the exact way his mother used to make it. He came home late, barely touched his plate, and muttered something about already grabbing a bite with coworkers. No apology, no thank you, just a grunt and a shrug. And then he disappeared into his office for the rest of the night. I told myself he was just tired. That stress made people forget their manners, that marriage had ups and downs. But something else started to change too. He grew colder with my family. He used to be charming with my parents, always insisting they stay longer after Sunday dinners. Now he'd disappear upstairs when they came over, or complain later that they overstayed their welcome. When I suggested we visit my sister for the weekend, he said he needed time to recharge. that he couldn't handle being around needy people right now. I didn't want to cause tension, so I made excuses for him. I told my family he was just overloaded with work. They smiled politely, but I could see the concern behind their eyes, especially my sister. She pulled me aside one day and asked, "Is everything okay with you two?" I laughed it off. "Of course," I said. "He's just tired. We all get tired, right?" She didn't look convinced. I didn't want to admit it. Not to her, not to myself. But things weren't the same. The man who used to adore me, who would bring me flowers for no reason and dance with me in the kitchen on a Wednesday night, now barely looked at me. Still, I wasn't ready to face the truth. I told myself this was what long-term relationships looked like, that love simply matured, quieted, settled. But in my heart, a little voice had started to whisper, or maybe it's fading. I remember the exact moment I stopped pretending everything was okay. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had spent the entire morning cleaning the house, folding laundry, and preparing a late lunch. Daniel had gone out early, saying he had errands to run. He didn't tell me what kind, and I didn't ask. I was trying not to be the clingy wife. I still wanted to be the cool, understanding version of myself. He came home around 4, reeking of expensive cologne he never wore for me anymore. He didn't have groceries or anything in his hands, just his keys and that faraway look in his eyes. When I asked him where he'd been, he shrugged and said, "Out. Just needed some time." And that was it. No explanation, no effort. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. That night, while he showered, I picked up his blazer and almost by instinct checked the pocket. There was a receipt from a restaurant I didn't recognize, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. My hands trembled as I folded it back and placed it exactly where I found it. I didn't ask him about it. I couldn't. What would I even say? Instead, I began watching more closely. He took more phone calls in the garage. He changed the password on his phone. His smiles became fewer, his touch more mechanical. And for the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The silence between us became heavy, so heavy that even small talk felt like walking on glass. I tried to bring up vacations, or starting a new hobby together, or even just having dinner without the TV on. But everything was, not now, maybe later, or worse, just a nod without a word. And then came the guilt. He accused me of being too sensitive, of imagining things, of making everything about me. "You don't even work," he said once. "You have no idea what pressure is." I stood there, stunned, as if managing a household, keeping his life in order, being emotionally available on demand, meant nothing. I began questioning myself constantly. Was I really being too emotional? Had I become a burden instead of a partner? That's when I started writing in a notebook, a simple journal. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I needed to pour somewhere the thoughts that were starting to drown me. And I wrote this one line, over and over again. When did love become something I had to earn? Let me ask you something. If someone you loved made you feel like a guest in your own life, would you wait it out? Would you tell yourself it's just a phase? Or would you finally ask, what happened to the man who promised never to make me feel alone? I stopped pretending to be okay on a Tuesday. It was pouring rain outside, the kind of rain that makes everything feel heavier. Daniel had just left for work. He didn't say goodbye, didn't kiss my cheek like he used to, just grabbed his keys and walked out as if I were invisible. I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't feel sad. I felt numb. Later that day, I did something I never imagined I would. I called his office, not because I wanted to catch him in a lie, but because I needed to hear his voice. His secretary answered. She sounded surprised. "Oh, I thought Daniel took the day off," she said cheerfully. "He mentioned a personal errand." My chest tightened. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence for what felt like hours. Then I cried. Not the kind of cry that needs comfort, but the kind where your body shakes and you don't even try to stop it. That night, I didn't wait for him to come home. I went to bed early and faced the wall. The next few days became a blur of avoidance. I couldn't look him in the eye without wondering who he really was anymore. He had become a roommate, a cold shadow of the man who once left love notes on the bathroom mirror. He didn't ask why I was quiet. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't ask anything. Instead, he filled the space between us with distractions, phone calls, long drives, sudden errands, anything but us. One night, while I was folding laundry, I found a lipstick stain on the inside collar of one of his shirts. It wasn't mine. I don't even wear that shade. I held the shirt in my hands for a long time. I didn't cry this time. I just sat there, holding it like proof of something I had known for months but refused to name: infidelity. The word sat on my tongue like poison, and yet I still couldn't bring myself to confront him. Why? Because deep down, I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid of what would happen if he didn't deny it, if he simply looked at me and confirmed what I already knew. Have you ever been so afraid of the truth that you convinced yourself it was safer to stay in the dark? That was me. The days dragged on. I started noticing the way he flinched when I touched him, the way he looked at his phone when he thought I wasn't watching, the way he laughed more at text messages than he did at my jokes. I tried to hold on to hope, to believe this was a phase, that something would snap him back into the man I married. But love shouldn't feel like begging. I began spending my afternoons alone at the park, watching strangers, mothers pushing strollers, elderly couples holding hands, women jogging alone, focused and free, and I found myself thinking, what if I were one of them? What if I left? Would anyone even notice? I wasn't ready to answer that yet, but for the first time, I knew I needed to. Something in me had shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a small click in the back of a drawer you hadn't opened in years, a realization that I couldn't go back to the way things were, because that version of my life no longer existed. One morning, Daniel came into the kitchen while I was making coffee. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair unbrushed. He didn't say good morning, just grunted, grabbed his mug, and scrolled through his phone. I watched him over the rim of my cup. The man I had once adored, once admired, had become someone I barely recognized. He didn't ask how I slept, didn't care that I hadn't eaten dinner the night before. We shared a house, a bed, a name, but not a life. So I started keeping a journal. Every thought, every observation, every little hurt I had swallowed down over the years, I wrote it all down. At first it felt awkward, even silly, but then something amazing happened. I began to hear my own voice again, not the voice that echoed off Daniel's moods, not the voice that apologized for taking up space, but mine. Each entry peeled away the fog that had settled over me. I wrote about the lipstick stain, the missed dinners, the way I sometimes cried in the shower just so the sound would be hidden. I wrote about how I used to be joyful, spontaneous, full of laughter, and how that woman had gone missing. And with each page, I became more certain. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was just neglected. One afternoon, while organizing our closet, I found a small box on the top shelf. Inside were old cards I had written him over the years, birthday cards, notes of encouragement, silly love letters from our first year of marriage. They were all unopened. Unopened. Can you imagine pouring your heart out to someone and they couldn't even bother to break the seal? That night, I waited until he fell asleep, and I sat on the floor of our bathroom with my journal in my lap and whispered the truth out loud for the first time. I don't think I love him anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't painful. It was peaceful. A few days later, I reached out to an old friend, Lisa. We hadn't spoken in over a year. I had pulled away from everyone, ashamed of my life, afraid to answer questions I didn't want to face. But Lisa didn't ask anything. She just listened. And when I told her I wasn't okay, she said the words I didn't even know I needed to hear. "You don't have to stay stuck, Emily." It stayed with me. All night. All week. What if I didn't have to stay stuck? What if I could build something new, not perfect, not easy, but mine? Have you ever felt that pull, like something inside you is waking up after being asleep for years? That's how it felt. I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. But I was ready to prepare to leave, and that, for me, was everything. I started squirreling away bits of money. I opened a new savings account in my name. I researched apartments and legal aid and therapy, quiet steps, invisible steps, but steps forward nonetheless. Because even if I wasn't standing yet, I had finally decided I would not stay sitting forever. Daniel must have sensed something was different. Maybe it was the way I no longer rushed to refill his coffee, or how I didn't jump at his every irritated sigh. Maybe it was the quiet way I started closing the bedroom door when I changed, or how I answered his questions with just enough civility, but no warmth. One evening, I came home from work late. I'd stayed behind to finish a project and talk to my manager about a potential promotion, something I hadn't told Daniel about. When I walked in, he was pacing in the living room, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Where have you been?" he snapped. "No hello, no welcome." "I had to stay late. I told you this morning," I replied calmly. "I don't remember that," he said. "You should have called." But I didn't feel guilty. Not like before. I didn't apologize. I just walked past him, hung up my coat, and went to the kitchen to pour myself some water. And when I turned around, he was standing there, watching me like I was a stranger. "You're changing," he said flatly. "Yes," I answered. "I am." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" It wasn't a question born of curiosity. It was a challenge, a threat. I didn't answer. I simply walked past him again and closed the door to our bedroom, something I had rarely done in our entire marriage. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought, why was he so angry now? Was it because he felt the control slipping? It hit me then. He didn't want a partner. He wanted possession, someone to orbit around him, to mirror his moods, to serve quietly and disappear when inconvenient. And for years I had done just that. But not anymore. That week I scheduled my first therapy session. I didn't tell him. I just said I had errands after work. It felt like betrayal, and that bothered me. Should it have? Should seeking help, understanding yourself, and wanting peace feel like betrayal? What do you think? If someone you loved had hurt you, not with fists, but with silence, with neglect, with slow erosion of who you were, would you still feel loyal to them? I sat in my therapist's office, clutching a tissue, and whispered, "I'm scared to leave, but I'm more scared to stay." She nodded. That's where most people begin. I began journaling differently after that. Less about pain, more about hope. I started envisioning my new life. What would it look like to wake up without walking on eggshells, to decorate a space how I wanted, to breathe without that constant knot in my chest? Lisa invited me over for dinner. I said yes. Daniel didn't like that. "You never spend time with me anymore," he said. I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Instead, I answered, "Because you never asked." I could see the panic rise in his face, masked as anger. But I didn't engage. I simply walked out the door and drove to Lisa's. That night, I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. And when I got home, I didn't explain myself. I just went to bed, and I dreamed of a little apartment with light yellow walls and my own bookshelf. For the first time, I started to believe that the version of me I had buried under years of compromise and silence was ready to come back to life. The morning I left, the sun was out, bright and almost cheerful, as if the universe was giving me a quiet nod. Daniel was at work. I had timed it that way. I'd packed the night before, one small suitcase and a box of journals. Everything else could stay. Clothes, dishes, furniture, they didn't matter. I wasn't moving out with things. I was moving out with myself. I stood for a long time at the doorway of what had once been our bedroom. The silence in that room had always been the loudest, and now, for the first time, it was just still. Not tense, not suffocating. Just still. I left my key on the kitchen counter. I didn't cry. Lisa helped me move into her guest room. We drank coffee on her small patio that evening, both of us wrapped in old blankets, watching the sky fade from pink to blue. "You look lighter," she said. "I feel like I'm finally breathing," I replied. And I was. For the first time in years, I could sleep without anxiety pressing into my chest like a weight. I no longer flinched at footsteps in the hallway or measured my every word before I spoke. I started eating again, real meals, not rushed bites over the sink. I even smiled at strangers. My therapist said it was normal to grieve, even when walking away from something toxic. But I wasn't grieving a man. I was grieving the years I'd lost, the version of me that had been quieted and dimmed. I found a small studio apartment within 3 weeks. It was nothing fancy, just one big room with creaky floors and mismatched windows, but it was mine. I painted the walls a soft sage green and bought a second-hand reading chair I'd always dreamed of having. I hung up photos of me and Lisa, of my parents, of the ocean. No memories of Daniel, not even one. There were hard moments. I'd still wake up some nights with the echo of his voice in my head, questioning my worth. I'd second-guess myself while paying bills or making decisions, that little internal critic whispering, "Are you sure you can handle this alone?" But the difference was, I no longer believed that voice. Or, if I did, it only lasted a moment before I remembered how far I'd come. One evening, I was journaling again, like always, but this time I wasn't writing about pain. I wrote about strength, about peace, about finding comfort in my own company. I wrote about how I was learning to build a home within myself, brick by brick. And then I paused, because something hit me. I had waited so long for someone to save me, and in the end, it was me. Me. I saved myself. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had to start over from scratch, not because you wanted to, but because staying meant disappearing? Have you ever had to walk away from everything familiar just to find yourself again? If so, you'll understand what I mean when I say, freedom doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence. It feels like waking up without fear. It feels like breathing without apology. That's what I found. Not perfection. Not a fairy tale. But peace. And peace, I've learned, is enough. My name is Emily, and I am no longer afraid of my own story. It's been nearly 2 years since I walked out of that house, and sometimes it still feels surreal. That a woman like me, who once whispered instead of speaking, who once tiptoed through her own life, could now stand tall, shoulders back, heart open. I've rebuilt slowly, not with grand gestures or perfect plans, but with quiet, consistent choices. Each morning that I got out of bed and made my own coffee, each bill I paid on my own, each time I sat with my fears and didn't run from them, those were victories. I've made peace with the woman I was. She wasn't weak, she was surviving, and now I honor her by living fully, loudly, and unapologetically. I started working part-time at a local nonprofit that supports women leaving abusive relationships. It felt like a natural step, like everything I'd been through had led me to this moment, not to break me, but to shape me. One afternoon, I sat across from a woman who reminded me so much of myself. Same hesitance in her eyes, same way she clutched her purse like a shield. She asked me, "How did you know it was time to leave?" And I told her, "The day I realized I was more afraid of staying than I was of starting over." That's the truth, isn't it? We don't always leave when we're strong. Sometimes we leave when we're broken, but brave enough to believe we deserve more. I still have hard days. Loneliness still visits. Doubt still knocks. But they don't stay long. They can't. Not anymore. Because I've changed the locks. And through everything, I've learned something vital. Something I wish I could whisper to every woman who's ever sat in the dark, wondering if she'll ever see light again. You are not what he did to you. You are not the names he called you. You are not the silence you endured. You are a woman, and that is enough. So if you're listening to this and you've faced your own storms, if you've ever felt small, invisible, unloved, know this: you are not alone. We're out here, women like me, women like us, rising, healing, holding one another up. And if you want to hear more stories of women like me, women who have faced heartbreak, betrayal, and injustice but still found a way to stand, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. And if this story moved you in any way, please like the video. It helps more women like us find it, because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind you that you're not the only one still standing, and that maybe, just maybe, you're stronger than you ever knew.